I'm Barney Espinoza. I was born and raised in Austin, Texas. After ninth grade, on a lark, a buddy of mine and I joined the National Guard. At the same time, my peers, my buddies, other buddies, were turning 17 and they were joining the Marine Corps Reserve. So, of course, they started telling me how much greater the Marines were than the Army, and it sounded very interesting to me. So I went and tried to join the Marine Reserve. When it got to the point of asking me for prior military service experience, I told them, and they said, "Well, do you have a discharge?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Well, you got to have a discharge." So I got my discharge, went back to the Marine Corps I&I staff and presented my discharge, and I was ready to go. But I was in the Marine Corps Reserve, so I decided, well, the Marine Corps really appeals to me, so I joined. I went on active duty for the first 4 years. And I went to Camp Pendleton and ran up and down the hills as a grunt all over Camp Pendleton. And once, on one occasion, we had helicopter support, and I got to ride the first helicopter in my life, which was a UH-34. There was an occasion when they landed, and we got to sit around and talk to the crew. And they were just very friendly. And I was really impressed when around the afternoon sometime, after working all day with us, they said, "Well, we're going to have to go back because Santa Ana is going to close the field." So that really impressed me, and I thought, I sure would like to be in helicopters. And then one day they posted a note on the bulletin board saying that volunteers were needed to go into aviation training. Next thing I know, they said, "Okay, you've been accepted to go into aviation training to Memphis." And they put me on a train out of Camp Pendleton, out of Oceanside, and I went to Memphis. So when I got to Memphis, fortunately I did get selected to go into aviation operations school. And when I finished that, I was sent to El Toro, California. When the group took me to report to my office, they took me into the operations office and they said, "This is PFC Espinoza, and he's going to be working here." And the operations officer, who was a major at the time, and I had never been around a pilot, and this guy just fit the role model of what I'd seen in comic books, and putting on his flight suits. The jets were parked right outside, no more than about 10, 15 yards from the building, from the hangar. And he stuck out his hand and said, welcome aboard, Barney." And it floored me. Here's a major calling me Barney. And then I looked around the room, and there must have been 3 or 4 lieutenants in there. There were a couple of captains and more captains and lieutenants and majors walking in and out like more than I had ever seen before. So I thought, this looks like a pretty good deal. And I enjoyed the work. And of course, I had always wanted to travel. That was a big factor in my wanting to join the military, especially the Marine Corps. And we deployed to Iwakuni, but that particular squadron being a photo and electronic reconnaissance squadron, we had detachments, usually each one would stay a month, it could be South Korea, it could be northern Japan, it could be Taiwan, it could be Philippines, a number of places. So we just rotated around. I'd be gone for a month here, a month there, come back, pick up your laundry, get advance pay, and go again. So it fit my bill. I had a wonderful time. When that was over, by that time I was a corporal, and they asked me, "Well, are you thinking about re-enlisting?" And I said, well, I thought to myself, if I get out, I'll never get to do this again. So I thought, no, I want to re-enlist. And of course, I went for the maximum 6 years. I rotated back to the States, went to Santa Ana, and I worked in base operations. I belonged to MAPS, but I worked here like a permanent TAD to base operations. So fortunately, when Vietnam broke out, the Mag 36 was going to be deployed, and I had some buddies, and they were saying, we're going to deploy, and I thought, what's going to happen to me? I'm just going to sit here and watch everybody go. I couldn't stand that, so I was grateful when they pulled me out, and we all boarded aboard the USS Princeton in Long Beach, and 20 days later, we arrived off the coast of Vietnam, and we made a helicopter landing in an isolated place, which later we named Kiha. And it ended up being about a mile or two north of where Chu Lai was being built at the time. So I was still belonging to MAPS, and MAPS doesn't have any airplanes, and we hardly had a tower, and we didn't have much to do there as operations people except process cargo going in and out. And so right before we landed, I was told that I was going to be part of the Provisional Rifle Company, which was a rifle company formed by people in the aviation units. And I had a secondary or primary MOS of 311, 0311, so therefore I was a big candidate for that, and they made me a squad leader. And there I was in the grunts again, and we run patrols, and we mostly built bunkers and stretched barbed wire and did all those mundane things, and including having to unload a merchant cargo ship of lumber and everything else that it was carrying, and we had to spend time unloading that. And so I kept networking, a term that was never used then, and with my other friends in operations, telling them I need a job in the operations of one of these squadrons. So the Purple Foxes came through because they had a Gunnery Sergeant Phillips who was the ops chief at 364, and I had met him. And so one day I get a call, or he came to see me or something, and said, how would you like to be ops chief of 364? And I thought, that's great. And then of course immediately I wanted to fly as a gunner. So I volunteered to be a gunner, and I flew as much as I could, and I enjoyed it. There were scary times, but I could be in a panic one moment, the next moment I've got an adrenaline rush, and I feel great, and I can't wait to go do it again. And some of these other guys around here, now we're old timers, but I flew with them. We're all corporals and some sergeants, and I can actually say that it was some of the best time that I ever had. We're actually in Vietnam. I mean, we had the scariest time. The one thing that stands out in my mind about our first few months, quite a few months in country, is the primitive conditions under which we lived. We had no showers. We rigged a tip tank from a jet plane, I guess, filled it with water, and they had a water buffalo parked next to it. And so the tip tank was up on scaffolding, and then you got under it and opened the faucet, and you got a halfway decent shower. About the best you could get there. It wasn't great. But the rule was you had to fill up the two 5-gallon jerry cans with water, and then replenish that water, pour it into the tank for every time you took a shower. So there's nothing funny to see a bunch of naked guys scrambling up the scaffolding, putting water into the tank. And but we had our shower there. When I moved over there with 364, it was the first time that I lived in a hardback tent. And because prior to that, when I was with MABS, of course builds all the hardbacks. They do all the construction, but MABS personnel didn't have anything. We were still putting our shelter halves together in the monsoon rains, which was pretty poor. And we lived in the mud. Of course, those few months also, we had scarcity of food, sea rations. And at one point, they scaled back our sea ration, a daily sea ration supply to one box, one meal per day. And they supplemented that. If you were at the base camp there, they put out a couple of sawhorses, put up some boards on it, make a big table, and they put big cans of, I'll never forget, it said on the side of the cans, peanut butter fortified. And then they had big cans of, they were like gallon cans of jam. And then they brought this stale bread, probably from the ships, or I don't know where it came from, but it was poor quality bread. And so if you were hungry, you went by there, and of course this stuff sat out there in the hot sun all day. Big tins of Spam, and they were put out there on the table. And you just open the can and pull out this cold Spam, which was all with all the gel and all. And of course, it's sitting out there in the sun. You just cut a big slice, made yourself a sandwich, and that went on for another week or so. Then we had, of course, on the beverage side, they had a big pallet, a giant pallet of beer and sodas. And every day you would get a chit, and you could get 2 cans of beer and 2 cans of soda. And of course, the beer, maybe it was donated or something, but it was the poorest quality. We had Grand Price, Jack's, Falstaff, and all those wonderful brands, but it was beer. And of course, it wasn't heated. It sat under everything sat under a big tarp in the heat of Vietnam. And they had a guard around it. And we each got our ration each day. And of course, you did a lot of trading, trade sodas for those that like sodas, and for the beer. And they didn't have pull tabs in those days, so you just stuck a knife into the top of the can and watch it spew out like a volcano. But it sure tasted good. And we thought that was wonderful. With each change, we thought, oh, this is great. This is getting better. And of course, after a couple of weeks, it gets very tired. Then you don't like it anymore. Then they came up with the idea that every day at lunch, they would give us a canteen cup full of split pea soup, and that would go for 1 week at lunch every day. And the following week, it would alternate to French onion soup. So that was real good for a week. But after 2 or 3 weeks, you couldn't stand that stuff. And to this day, my wife doesn't cook with anything with onion soup or such in her dishes, because once I smell that, and I don't eat Spam either. So things gradually got better. I flew missions. We had some real excitement. We had some great pilots. We established a great record. We had pilots that just did everything in the world to accomplish a mission, and you always had the confidence that they were going to get you out of there no matter what happened. There was a good friend of mine, was a crew chief, Davy Springer, who is now deceased also. We were flying with Tricky Dick, and we went out, and it was a max launch about 6 o'clock in the evening, because one of our birds had gone down. And they didn't crash, but they just couldn't lift again or something off the rice paddy. So we all launched, and we didn't actually pick up the crew, but we were there just to cover them, and there was a lot of shooting. And so when we took off towards a small village that was there, and Tricky Dick said, "Watch that village in front of us." So I was on the left gun, and so I was looking at the village. I couldn't see anything, and all of a sudden we started getting fired on. So I couldn't see where it was coming from, but I saw this prominent structure, and it was unfortunately it was a Christian church, because they had a cross on top of it, and it had a thatch roof, and it had I think it might have been cinder blocks or something. And I thought, I bet they're shooting out of that church because they think we won't shoot back. So I opened up on the church. And of course, with the tracers, I started, before we made our turn to the right, I was still shooting almost straight down by that time. And I pulled my gun out and ran over to the side of the crew chief, to the big door, where he had his own gun. And we made a complete turn. And when the church came back inside, we continued to fire on it, and all we could see is flames and smoke coming out of there in the dusk. And so we left, and the fire subsided, so maybe they were in church. However, it became a joke between David Springer and I and we were laughing that we burned a church. And so, unfortunately, Davey died some years ago, so I'm hoping he cleared the way for me to arrive and I don't have to re-explain why we burned the church. But that was one of the many missions. We had a lot of rescue missions. We flew night and day, medevacs. And in the 34s, it was a small bird, so we had Arvins, and nothing was funnier or sadder than carrying the Arvins, which to us, they just seemed lackadaisical about the whole situation. And a lot of times they jump aboard the plane where we were going to take them into some zone. And of course, they get aboard with their chickens and stalks of bananas and even a live pig one time. Once, Dave Springer and I loaded a bunch of them, and there were civilians and Arvin mixed, and they had a small pig strapped to a pole, and it was a live pig, and the pig was thrashing around. Of course, he didn't like a helicopter ride, so the pole was banging around the walls of the helicopter. And me as a gunner, I'm sitting facing the crew chief on the left side. He's on the right side facing me. And we kept telling the Arvins, or the people, to hold on to that pole, not to let the pig thrash around and bang up the helicopter on the inside. Well, they weren't very good at that. So Dave motioned for me to pick up the end of the stick closest to me. And he picked up his end, and I knew what he was going to do, so we just threw it out the door. And of course, all the people in the helicopter were super upset, yelling and screaming. We couldn't hardly hear them. But that was a case of flying pigs. That was the way it went when we worked with the civilians or the Army. We flew many missions. We came up. I don't remember exactly when we started having the Purple Fox emblem on the aircraft and the give a shit. And everybody thought it was a great idea. And so we were very proud of that logo. And I remember that once while we were operating on the Princeton again, up and down the coast, for about 3 months after we had been in country, about 6-7 months, then we had to go to the Philippines to get replenishments and fresh troops. So while there, we were tasked with a mission of taking President Marcos and Mrs. Marcos, on a trip to the National Cemetery. Or it's an American cemetery. I don't remember the exact name of it. But, Colonel Somerville wisely said, you better remove the give a shit from their logo because they might not appreciate it. So that's the one time I remember that the give a shit portion of the logo was painted over so that the president would see that. And in all, I think the squadron, we just all clicked together. We were there in an era before the strict rules of engagement. We went there with the idea and thought and the support for us to go in there and kick ass and win that war like Marines had done for generations throughout their history. And with that in mind, we accomplished a lot. Everybody was willing to hang their rear end out for the mission, and we did. And it was we felt much better. The morale was higher under those conditions than they were during the time when I went back for my second tour. And I flew in the CH-46 then as a gunner. When I went back, the rules of engagement had gotten worse. You couldn't shoot if there were this. You could only shoot if that was that. You had to call back, get permission. So I think it cost lives. I think it caused frustration. Morale went down. And consequently, when I finished that second tour of mine, I wanted to go on the first one. I wanted to go on the second tour, which was 69 and 70. And when I left my last tour after 12 months, I thought to myself, they can send me to any war, any wars, but I'm tired of this one because we just can't conduct the war to win. We were just existing. And the Army wasn't getting any better or having a better enthusiasm about winning the war themselves. So I was really discouraged after that. I'm very proud of the service in my Marine Corps career. I'm very proud of my service in Vietnam, and I have no regrets about that. I continued my Marine Corps career in various places. I went to Beaufort, South Carolina after that first tour with the Purple Foxes, and I was with Jet, VMFA 312, for a year. I went to Hawaii for about 20 months, worked base operations, and then I was sent to Vietnam again, which I was fine with. I went back 69, 70, flew as a gunner. By the time I finished that second tour, I had accrued over 700 combat missions combined. And but when I left that last tour, I said, I'm never going to get in a helicopter again. That's it. I was more afraid of the flying, conditions, pilot error, whatever, jungles in the middle of the night, mountainous areas, the weather, than I was of the shooting. Maybe it's because when there was shooting, I was doing something. When I was just riding in the back of the helicopter, praying that we didn't run into a tree or a mountain, which was very real because we lost people that way. So when I left the country, I didn't even ride the helicopter from Marble Mountain to Da Nang Freedom Hill to catch my flight to Okinawa. Instead, I chose to ride in the back of a truck, and I thought I'm going to enjoy my trip in the back of the truck because I had flown that route to Da Nang before, having to fly under the fixed wing traffic. So those pilots hot dog, going low to the ground, in and around trees and low to the river, and I thought, I don't want any of that. I don't want to get killed on the way home. So I rode the truck. And so when I got back from that second trip, I went to New River. After a year, I went on a med cruise, which was wonderful. It was during peacetime. There was no action. That was in 72. Some of the same guys that I had flown with in Vietnam, the Purple Foxes, we were all together aboard ship in the Mediterranean. I returned back from that, and then I was sent on a company tour to Okinawa with my family. We spent 3 years there. Great tour. I was base operations chief for the Fatima airfield. Left there, went to California for 1 year. After a year of that, I was sent to Hawaii again. I was a MAC 24 operations chief for there in Hawaii in the brigade. And I got selected for E9, and I had to make a decision whether I was going to retire or accept it. If I accepted it, I was going to have to commit for 2 more years. So I thought, no, I've done everything. I enjoyed it, loved it, but I wanted to do something else, and I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I was working on my master's degree by that time. So I went ahead and retired, went home to Austin, Texas. I got a job with the state controller as his liaison to all the courts in the state. One thing led to another. The next thing I knew, I was appointed a municipal judge in a small city called Dripping Springs in Texas, about 13 miles south of Austin. And after about a year, a larger city on the north side of Austin, Cedar Park, Texas, and they were losing one judge, so they asked me if I was interested. And of course, I had better qualifications by that time. So I went ahead and went to work for them. And I enjoyed that. It wasn't my real goal, or I didn't aspire to be a judge. It was as if somebody had said, you want to go to the moon? Yeah, sure, right. And so my thoughts when I retired from the Marine Corps, I wanted to go to work in an airport. But the airport there said I had wonderful qualifications and experience, but they couldn't hire me, they didn't have the money. They said, perhaps when we build a new airport, and it was in the works then, but I kiddingly told the city aviation director, I said, by the time you build the airport, I'll be retired again. And it almost worked that way because I was either just retired or getting ready to retire when they opened the airport, which is Bergstrom International Airport in Austin. I worked as a municipal court judge, and finally I retired in 1998. I could have gone longer, but I thought, no, it just wasn't as much fun. I enjoyed it, but it wasn't the experience or the feelings that I had with the Marine Corps. Therefore, I retired for good in 1998.